Welcome to another episode of Fight the Burnout. As we are this year, we have another first responder. We actually have a ex-police officer who's just about to. Well, he left the police, but been doing some other stuff. He's just about to completely retire and has sold his house and go travel. So he is at the later stages of everything. So he's gonna let us know what it's all like and everything. He has a very exciting and amazing story. He's gone even beyond, if you've been watching any of this stuff of me, he's gone beyond where I did or where so many others did, and is here to still tell the tale. So let's really have a listen. Make sure, as I always say, to take one thing away from this. So just listen out, and whatever hits you the hardest, take it, run with it, implement it, live it, eat it, breathe it, and then come back and listen again, and grab another one. But as I always like to do, we have Mike here. Mike, just give us a little bit about who you are, and a little bit, in maybe 5-10 minutes, your a bit of your backstory, and then we'll really dig into things deeper.
Um, well, my name is Mike Maunder, and currently I live in Phoenix, Arizona. Um, I, I'm originally from Oregon. I grew up just outside of Portland, Oregon, in a town called Gresham, and went to high school there, college there, before I spent the rest of my life, most of my life, I spent it in Bend, Oregon, the central part of Oregon. And then just after I retired, I kind of floated around a little bit and ended up in Arizona with my son down here. And so I've been here ever since. Currently, I work for Maricopa County. I supervise an investigation unit, and my last day is in another 8 days.
8 days from this recording. That's awesome. So by the time this goes live, you'll be retired and traveling around. This is
40
awesome.
years. 40
40,
years.
40 years been doing, been in some sort of law enforcement or investigation role. So how long were you in, because it was Bend, Oregon, you were in active law enforcement, weren't you?
Oh, I was actually, I, my story is interesting because I grew up in such my house, my parents were, my dad was a business executive. The fire department used to hold their annual summer picnic behind our house at my friend's house that I grew up with. When I get 18, I'm going to join that fire department. I had no clue at all what I was getting into, none at all.
As most young guys and girls don't.
Like, well, let's see how exciting this was, and oh, it was exciting. So I joined that, and then I got hired for a short time, and I was put me at the station, and it was just slow, and I was young, and I wanted to experience all that adrenaline.
Yeah.
So then a buddy, a school teacher friend of mine said, "Oh, you ever thought about being a cop?" And I was like, "No." And he goes, "Well, come out and ride with me." So I went out on this ride along up in Multnomah County, Oregon, and I was like, "Now this is fun."
Those damn ride-alongs get it every time. They either make it or
Oh,
break it. One of the two.
man, it was just I was like, I got to do this, and so I said, I'm gonna work on that. So my first job was as a police officer was at a 3-man department on the coast, very short amount of time. And then I went to this other small department just outside of Portland called Troutdale, and I was there for 8 years. But most of my time I was assigned to the downtown Portland units, working narcotics and major crimes. That was all we did. Um,
Wow.
the interesting part of this whole story that that I can try to relate to explain to people is I stayed in the fire department for 18 years. So I stayed as a volunteer fireman for 18 years. And when I went to Bend, the Central Oregon, I continued to be a volunteer fireman, and I was an officer. So, which kind of relates to how the whole story goes. And I think as we go on, I can explain it more, just tell you, because literally I was dealing with stuff 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. You don't sleep.
There wasn't any
So,
target.
and so it just kept on going and kept on going. And so I had my downfall.
Mm.
I guess not downfall. It was
Your awakening. Your
my
awakening.
awakening.
We'll call it your
Yeah.
awakening.
Yeah.
So, Mike, as I always like to do, because everybody has a different definition of burnout. Obviously, there's Webster's definition and that, but who cares about that? It's all about personal what we believe it is. What would you say your definition of burnout is before we go any further?
Absolutely. It's just burned out was just not being able to function. Not what I call not function in society. You just couldn't function. I couldn't think. I couldn't. Um, it's just I was. It was just burned out. If I couldn't do anything. I didn't feel like I could be social. I didn't feel I could be. I just didn't know where to go. I had nowhere to turn. So
Mm.
that was the bad part of it. So my burnout, what I call burnout, was just that. I was lost. I was a lost person for a while.
Mm. Lost. It sounds like a bit alone. It felt like you're alone, nowhere to go.
Yes.
Yet,
Yes.
as law enforcement, we have and fire. I think fire actually has it even better than law enforcement. We've got our whole team that we're around, but yet we're all feel alone, so we all push each other away, don't we?
We did, but times have changed. When
Yeah.
I first started, we were very team oriented and did a lot of things as a team. Um, as things got changed over the years, um, the teamwork wasn't quite the same, but you only associated with the guys that you were close with.
Yeah.
So, back in the day, we only, because they were the ones that understood. Your wife, you can go home and believe me, I've been married 5 times, 6 times, something like that. Um, I've been through the gamut. And because you go home, you cannot function. It's like, um, my brain was always on call. It was always, um, okay, what's next? Am I going to be called out through the police department? Am I going to be called out through the fire department?
Mm.
What's it going to be? Something's going to happen because you can't relax. And then as soon as you go to bed and you relax, bam, your pager goes off and you're out the door and you're running again, and
Yeah.
you're in that function mode. So when you're home and you're trying to function and be a part of society, it's not there. It's
Your mind's elsewhere.
yeah, your mind is in other places. You're anticipating that
Yeah.
what's going to happen next, and
That high
who
alert,
knows
that
what that could
consistent
be.
high alertness. I can relate to that one. I had that as
Yeah.
well. The consistent high alertness of, even if I was off duty and I didn't have I mean, I didn't, we weren't on call, but even if I was off duty, it was always applying the same principles as when I was on duty.
Right.
And man, it gets tiring. Um, Before we go into kind of the story and the awakening, as we've kind of now put the name on it, what is, I want to just tell, let's start on a, I like to start on an up, on a high. What is one thing, one major thing, like the number one thing that you feel you've learned from all of your career and your life up until now? What would be the number one thing that you've learned from it all?
To try to talk to people and listen, and I always try to be there for everybody. So that's probably the one thing. I always say, if I could always help one person, then I was successful. And through my career, I've talked officers off the ledge, and by some of it's by sharing my story just privately with them, and some of it's because it's the same fear. If I say anything, I'm going to get fired, or I'm going to lose my job, or something. So you're always talking to people privately, trying to help them.
Mm.
So I think the one thing I've learned is try to share. So I've tried to share my story more and more, but not everybody wants to listen. And then some people, I think this, how's the story go? The people who've been there and done it are least likely to talk. Then the more people talk and have their stories, they're the most probable people who haven't been through it. I mean, that's kind of like, that's
Yeah,
what it's
I
about.
think I know we've talked about this in the past as well, and it's that thing of there's that fear of, especially as us law enforcement, when we're in and amongst it, we're like, no, I'm supposed to be the strong one, so I'm just
Yep.
not going to talk about it. I'll deal with it. It will be fine. And it's so interesting. You know, you're like the 10th person that said that to me, where I'm worried about losing my job and my career.
Yep.
And you know, I'm a huge why person. I help people create their mission statements and, you know, really make sure that their identity is them, not what they do. But that statement almost winds me up the wrong way in some ways, because I'm like, you're so worried about losing your career and getting fired that you're willing to sacrifice yourself.
Yep. You were old
And
school, but it's old school versus new school.
it is.
That's how I say.
Yeah.
'Cause
And it
new
is old
school, they
school
don't
versus
do
new
that.
school, but at the same time, it's the same thing, because it's like, well, if you're lost and if you're destroyed, or if, and we'll get into your story here in a second, but if you're not here, you've been fired or lost your career anyways.
Yeah.
And so, is a career worth losing yourself?
No, I will tell you that the job took its toll on me
As it does
more
on
than
so many.
more than I ever know. But I can tell you, it took its toll on me. It ruined all sorts of things in my life. So
Why do you believe, and we'll go into your story just after this question, but why do you believe that it took such a toll on you? What do you think the number one thing is?
because I wouldn't talk. I wouldn't talk. I didn't think anybody wanted to hear it. I didn't think anybody cared. I didn't think it's just, I don't think anybody, I believe that nobody cared, and I had to be the strong guy. I was the senior guy in so many different things. And from fatal car accidents, shootings, whatever it was, I was the guy who didn't want the young guy to go through some of the stuff I'd been through. So I was the guy putting the people in the body bags. I was just like, hey, why don't you get back? Let me deal with this.
The protector.
I'm the guy that's going to do this. I'm the guy that's going to jump in with both feet. I'm going to be the first guy there, and I'm going to, because I don't want you to experience what I experienced. So sometimes it was almost like I was trying to protect things and protect the younger guys. And so when you go to some of these debriefs and some of the things that happen, and we started doing more and more debriefs, and which was good, but I wouldn't talk because I was the guy that couldn't talk, but I was always there to listen to the guy. Maybe the guy wasn't directly on scene and he was maybe on a perimeter, but I listened to his story, but I wouldn't share my story. I didn't want everybody to know how I was feeling, even though I was ripped apart, 14 shades, and I was going on long drives trying to clear my head or hitting a bottle because I didn't know which way to go, and that was my way of, that's how I'm going to deal with it. So
What benefits did that bring?
oh, it didn't, not a thing.
So here's my belief. I believe that with every bad thing or negative, there's always something good that's come out of it. What do you believe good that came out of you going through, during that time?
My kids, my son being a police officer now, I'm fortunate because I can relate to him and I make him talk.
Yeah.
Sometimes he doesn't want to talk, but here's the good thing with him. He calls me because he knows I've been there and done it. So he'll call me.
Yeah.
And I've been with him when he's gone through his debriefs and some of the bad stuff he's gone through.
Yeah.
So,
do you believe even back then, by you not talking but listening, you were able to actually help those other officers, or even by making sure that you were dealing with the stuff, you were able to help those officers to make sure that they weren't going through what you were?
Yeah. So I tried to guide them. The other thing it really helped me with, now this is kind of funny. When I was trying to negotiate with somebody to get them out of crisis, I think if I could talk to somebody, I had 100% success rate, 100%. And I think it was because I could relate to them. And I think that's how I could get my hook in them, and I could say, this is why we need to do this, because I could share my story, say, listen, I've been there, I've done this. And believe me, there was situations that there was nobody could believe I got people out. There was nobody. The SWAT team was all mad at me. They're like, how did you get this guy out of there? It's like, I mean, saying, I'm going to shoot it out with you guys. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. One guy was, I'm going to shoot it out with you. He just killed his roommate in his house. And I couldn't find anything. I was trying everything to hook him in. His cat, his flipping cat. I talked him out over his cat.
So as
nobody believed it. Nobody in a million years. Neither did I. I couldn't.
God. But that's the thing. And and the reason I wanted to bring that up was because your initial response was there was nothing.
Yeah, the SWAT team was going to go in.
But
they're telling me they're going to go in.
What I mean is your initial response to you not talking and you going through all this stuff, there was nothing good. All of a sudden, we've seen all this, and I just wanted to bring that up for people that maybe people are going through stuff and they're struggling to talk, or they're struggling to get their story out to people, or struggling to just put their hand up and say, hey, I'm not doing so well and I need to look after me for a little bit. There's good that comes out of it. You have done good from all of the stuff that's happened, quote unquote, so many people use to you. It's all happened actually for you to create this goodness. You fast forward, 20 years, I think it is, around, your son's now calling you when he goes through stuff because he understands, and you can do all that. So Mike,
I hit rock bottom.
And I want to talk about that now because I think this is very important to talk about. And I appreciate, I know that you don't, I remember us talking before we even, organized this interview, and you're like, well, I don't talk about this much. I talk about it in private and that, but not hugely out to people, but you also know the impact that it can make. So I appreciate you for being here, and I appreciate you for being, as vulnerable as you feel you can be today. So Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you just called rock bottom?
I think it was a rock bottom. So over the years, you deal with things. Some things you remember, some things you forget about. I mean, you really do. You forget about them for whatever reason. You hide them or you do whatever. But I can tell you to this day, in 1979 on Thanksgiving Day, I pulled a dead guy out of a Volkswagen Buck. I mean, I can tell you that. I can remember what it looked like. It was the first time I'd ever seen a dead person in a car wreck. And I had no idea what I was doing. And I was like, this guy's dead. Then I find out he's going to the airport to pick up his girlfriend for Thanksgiving. So I was like, but you got to remember, in 1979, when I first started into all this, if you showed emotion, you were weak. And your weakness would ruin your career because you couldn't be weak. And so when I got in law enforcement, it was even more so. So, you'd go to these crashes, and I remember people in car wrecks that were burned and people that, died as you're pulling them out. I remember all of these things. A guy tried to kill me one night along the freeway, and I literally strangled him out. And, it's like but you couldn't talk about it to anybody. You couldn't talk about the fear because I was scared. I was really scared after that. And so then it got to the point where the new guys are coming on. I had to be tougher. So I'm the guy that has to be. I'm the guy that has to pick them up and move them around and do these things. And I remember we were on a really bad domestic when I first went down to Bend PD. I'd only been there a couple of years, and a guy was in it was a domestic situation where he had taken his girlfriend hostage, and he was across this long field, and there was gunshots that we didn't know what happened. And as he drove toward us, I just got there, and the other two officers that were there, there was shots fired, and they're like, we didn't shoot. And we ran up to the car because we couldn't see inside the car because of how the sun hit us. And I remember I went to the passenger side, and there was a female in the passenger seat, and they pulled the guy out of the driver's seat, and he had blown his head off. But I remember she had brain matter on her, and her eyes were like huge, and she's trying to talk to me, and she can't because her jaw is blown off. And I'm like going, you got to relax, you got to relax, you got to relax. And I'm like going, just stay calm. I go, just look at me, stay calm. And I'm just like, I'm a mess. And but then there was blood, and I'm like, where is this blood? It doesn't make sense. And I opened her shirt, and she had 2 flipping bullet holes, 22 small caliber, right in her chest, and she was bleeding out. So we got a helicopter in, and we're loading her up, and we're rushing her to the helicopter. She codes as soon as we get her in the helicopter, and she dies. And it wasn't long. That ate me alive. I mean, that completely just tore me apart. But I think the thing that really tore me apart was we were about 2 years later. I was teaching a class at a high school, and we were talking about things. And somebody asked me, like, what was one of the worst things that happened to me recently? And I shared this story. And this girl in the class starts crying. And she talked to me afterwards, and she says, that was my mom. And I'm like, wow. She goes, why didn't you guys shoot him? Why didn't you save my mom? Why didn't you shoot him? And I didn't have the answer. I was like, how do you answer it? And it was like, so it was like, I was like a basket case. I mean, then I had a bunch of other stuff happen. But, during that time too, where another young lady came to me, and she'd taken a bunch of aspirin, and she ended up dying because her dad was burning her with cigarette butts, And so as it goes on, and you deal with these things, they keep pouring in, and you just keep. I never dealt with them. I had no one to talk to. I couldn't go to anyone. My teammates I couldn't go to. We would talk about it at parties or whatever, but I couldn't go home and talk about it. Are you kidding me? That was the worst thing that ever happened to me. So your brain you just start getting numb to everything. And I think I've shared this with you too. There's no emotion. I had no more emotion. I had nothing. It was like, I still don't have a lot. But then there's things that go on, and I had another baby that died. I did CPR on this baby, and it was like I was right there when the call came out, and I jumped in the ambulance and doing CPR. I mean, in my head, there's no reason this baby died, and we couldn't save it. And I remember the mother telling us, why didn't you save my son? Why didn't you save my child?
So it just that same thing just keeps getting concreted in over and over again. Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that?
Right. Keeps going and going and going. And so then it gets to the point in my life where it has gotten bad. I mean, I can't even function. Drinking, trying to just keep my brain occupied, and bad marriages. And we had this kid that get held hostage by his estranged father, and he held another girl hostage, and we were trying to talk him out. And turns out he was filling the bathtub with water to drown the kid. And it was like I was trying to talk him out, and he was just, I knew a lot of history of him. I had dealt with him many times before. And then when we couldn't hear the baby cry anymore, I got the girl out, and then he had this baby, and when they kicked the door in to get him, I mean, I could hear him. He was holding the baby like by the bathtub. They told me later, but they brought that baby out to us, and I just remember that. And that was like I had to leave. I mean, there was nothing. I was nuts. I was like, God, what happens if I made the wrong call? I mean, that kid was gonna die, But who do you go talk to? So what did I do? I went out and I said, well, I'm just gonna go get drunk. And everybody goes, what's wrong with you tonight? I'm like, nothing. I don't want to talk about it. So it kept progressing.
You created that habit by that stage that people were asking you and wanting to talk to you, but you had the habit now of, I don't talk to people.
And then I found that if I did talk to people, you'd get halfway through your story and they would go, yeah, that happened to me once. This is what happened. And I'm like, well, I'm not in a competition with you. That's not what I want to do. So I'm not going to talk to anybody. So as we know, it progressively got worse. And it was at the point where I didn't know what to do anymore. I was a lost soul. I gone to this counselor. So I went to a couple of counselors, and they were a joke. They were an absolute joke. And when I went to them, one guy fell asleep when I was talking to him. And finally I said, I need a name of somebody. So the name they gave me, I went to her, but her husband was a judge. And I knew her husband. I've been in court with, in front of him many times throughout the years. And, but I remember she kept saying, you're not talking. And I said, let me tell you my fear. I have two fears. I told her, here are my fears. Fear one is, if I tell you what I really feel, and you think, because I know from being in that side of the world, if you think I'm a danger to myself or others, you have to go say something. If you go say something, then I have nothing. And then what am I going to be? And I said, my second fear is that you're going to go talk to your husband, and now it's going to get out through that way. So I'm not sure how I'm supposed to relate with you. And over many sessions, she broke me down, and to where I got some trust in it. But I was still just crashing because I still, I still I couldn't come all the way out.
You have lots of shields, tons and tons
Yep.
of shields up, and masks, and everything's there. All this armor that, especially back in your days when you were policing, it was, there wasn't that support there. There wasn't that trust. There wasn't that acknowledgement that shit, the stuff that you deal with as a law enforcement is not normal.
Normal. There was nothing normal about law enforcement.
There is nothing.
You deal with the negative of everything.
There is nothing normal, but you can do some good stuff with it. Okay, so yeah, you're with this this counselor therapist. And what happened next?
So she did what do you call it with the headphones and the feelers? I can't remember what it's called right now. And I remembered some other things that happened.
Like hypnotherapy type side of stuff.
Yeah, and it was bringing out other things, and I was just like going, oh my God, I remember that. And then it was like getting worse and worse. And then it was just, my whole life was just crashing around me, just crashing. So I had a couple of drinks, and I was just like in my truck, and I went down to the river. So in Bend, there's a river that goes like through the center part of town, right? And it's very, very popular for floating and rafting. And I went down, and I was armed because I'm always armed, right? And I was down on this dock, and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. My life, my life's fucked up. I got to change it. And but I can't. I don't know how. I have no support. I have nothing. I have nowhere to go, nowhere to turn. I have nothing. And so I was going to take my life that day, right on that bridge. Not on a bridge, it was like on a dock thing, like sitting out there. And then my thought was my kids. My thought was, I don't want somebody to find me here. So maybe I'll walk up the river a little bit further, sit on one of the rocks. All these things are going through my head. And then in all the years of negotiating, we always told people, there's always tomorrow. Let me get through today, and then there's always tomorrow, right? Then you can, if that's what you choose, tomorrow. So literally, it was at night. It was like it was dark out. It was in the summer, and I remember I reached out to this counselor, and she says, "You're in my office, 8:00 in the morning." I said, "You're going to listen to me?" She goes, "Yeah." So I said, "Okay, tomorrow's a new day," and I walked away. And I walked in her office, and I said, "If you ever tell anybody this you're going to ruin me." And she goes, "I will not tell a soul." And she didn't. She never told anybody. So she started working with me for months, and I got my head screwed on straight a lot more. Still going through some bad things, but then what things really came to light was I was in a training class, and Corey, one of your previous guests, he was running this unit, and Corey and I have worked together for a long time. And Corey, I never talked to Corey about any of that. But I remember we were in this class, and this guy was teaching this class, and I'm like, he was teaching it like no, this isn't what happens.
Mm.
And the more he talked, the more I sat there I was like, it's not exactly how that happens. Well, yeah, this is how we look at it. And I said, but that's not how it happens. This is why it happens. Yeah, but not according to this. And I was like, finally, I just turned around and I was like,
He kept not listening.
he kept not listening. And I said, I'm going to tell you how I know. And I told my story to this class. And I looked back and Corey's sitting back there and I'm like, well, I'm glad I'm close to retirement. I got my retirement time in. I guess I can retire now because I thought I was done.
Yeah.
And I had 3 people in that class come talk to me. And one called me afterwards. And Corey came up and talked to me. And I said, well, pack my bags. And he goes, hell no. He goes, you're going to work with us. So, yeah.
So what'd you learn from that, Mike?
That people were there to help. I learned that on that day. That was probably the first day that I learned it. So
it's funny. Like, I want to say thanks for sharing that, because I know how hard it can be, especially if you're not used to sharing it, knowing that this is going out to the world. And so I appreciate that, wholeheartedly. And that is, you have seen and dealt with a lot, and experienced a lot. And what I will say, and because I'm always a half glass full person, haven't always been, as you know, as many people know, but I am now. And I want to say, you learned a lot,
yeah,
everything that happened for you, because that's what I like to say, everything that happened for you has created this amazing person who you are now, who you're going to help your son. You help so many different people. You're going to help so many people just by sharing now. And so I want to praise you for that as well. And I want to say, I haven't gone through all the things and seen all the things and done all the things that you've experienced, but I can relate, because I was the same way in the end.
Yeah.
Who cares? Why? I'm going to show weakness. My best friend, so I went through stuff twice, and I went through that burnout twice. And I think you and I have talked about this, but I just want to say it for viewers, not to diminish your story at all, because yours is way, way bigger and more learning experiences than mine. But we all are in it together. And I went through stuff twice in the job, saw counselors twice. The first lot were horrible.
Yeah.
The one lady was pretty good. She helped my wife a lot, but again, I wasn't talking, so I have to take my own ownership, as we always do. And then I went to the police psychologist as well, the police counselor. I think he was a psychologist, and he was absolutely horrible. All he did was feed into me wanting to run away, and he's like, "Yeah, go for it." I was like, I've heard about it a few times in different departments around the world. But anyways, again, I probably wasn't talking enough. I probably wasn't saying what was actually truly going on. But I remember that first time I didn't tell anybody. My wife and I didn't tell anybody what was going on. I didn't even tell my best friend, who I met at police college, who we're now friends. I just saw him yesterday. And then few years later, towards the end of my policing career, I went through it again. And it hit me like Mike Tyson hitting, doing his left hook that he used to throw, knocking people out, hit me even harder, because I hadn't actually worked through it all. And I remember that time, and I was like, and that was when I almost cheated my wife, and everything just went downhill. And I started to talk about it, and I told my best friend that it was, and I was like, this is happening again and all this. And he turns to me and he goes, "Hang on, wait a second. Again?" And I go, "Yeah, again." I was like, it happened a few years ago. I was seeing counselor, blah, blah. He's like, "Why didn't you tell me?"
Yep.
And I remember seeing his face and going, "I don't know why." Because I didn't think that I didn't want to burden you with it in a way. And I'm getting emotional about this because it still hits me. Why didn't I talk about it? Yeah. And it's that ego thing. And I so many law enforcement. And so I want to, again, praise you for it, and tell anybody who's listening to this, like Mike has said so far, talk about it.
It's hard. It's hard. It's hard to talk about it. In my later part of my career at Bend, a guy was destroying an apartment. Had a reserve with me, and we were just left a fatal pedestrian crash. And this call comes out, and I remember telling him, I go, this isn't going to go good. My gut was like, this is not going to go good. And we're moving up on this building, and he's on this deck firing off a shotgun, and we're coming around the building, and somebody says he's coming out, and he's walking, and they gave me like he's walking toward me, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna have to shoot the guy. That was my thought. There's no choice. But he turned and he went the other way, and as we came around the corner, he was sitting on the hood of a car, and he literally took the shotgun underneath his chin, and he torched himself right there in front of us. And
that never leaves your mind.
No, and it was like, but again, old school is like, well, shit, guy shot himself. But the reserve that was with me was like, he was like white as a ghost, didn't know what to do. And he goes, he's breathing. And I'm like, because he doesn't know he's dead yet. But he's dead. He doesn't have a head. And I was trying to help him, and we had people screaming because there's all sorts of people around there, people yelling and screaming and yelling. And I'm like, oh my God, trying to get everybody calmed down. But I remember even in that debrief, I didn't say a word, not a word. I let everybody else do the talking. They were all the younger guys, let them do the talking, because I was the old guy. This isn't supposed to hurt me, because you got to remember, back when I started, you couldn't show that. The younger guys were showing it, and it was like, well, good. I'm glad you guys are showing it.
I think
when I left, it was a basket case.
Yeah, there's a definite, like, and I say this all the time, and I say, as law enforcement, we have to have emotion.
Yeah.
We have to have emotion, because otherwise we stop caring. And once we stop caring, we are destructive. And if you're destructive, you're no better than the criminals that we're locking up, because you start thinking that things are okay that actually aren't. And at that stage, you should be, if you're at that stage, I'm going to put a plug in here for myself, reach out to me, or just reach out to somebody, reach out to a counselor of some sort, or reach out to Mike, or somebody that you listen to on this podcast that you resonate with, because that's the point where you can destroy everything you care about, which, as we've talked about today, you've had stages of, Mike, throughout your life and career. What would be, I know back in the day, back in the 70s, 80s, I've talked to a lot of people that were cops for like 30 plus years. So, they're back 70s, 80s, 90s, and, the culture has changed a lot, which is amazing to see. But it's still that you have to be this specific image or identity as an officer. What would you say to those that are, coming up into, that are starting their career, or are in it a few years, or even been in it for a long time? What would you say to those people coming along? What would be your top tip to them?
Don't forget who you are. Don't forget where you came from. And don't let the job get to you. And I think the mentality is changing, which is good. But you got to remember, you get in law enforcement, you're taught repeatedly. There's all these things in the academy that you learn, and you're taught. You have to protect yourself. You have to do this. You have to do that. You have to do this. You have to do that. So when you leave the academy, you're scared, but you're tough. It's like leaving basic training, right?
Yeah.
So I can handle it all, but I have to create this image that they want me to be and what society wants me to be. So I can't show you in society what I am, because I'm not allowed to do that. So I have to still keep my image up. And the image is what? Is being tough. That's the image. The image is like, none of this bothers me. That's what they teach you. It's not supposed to bother you. It's not supposed to bother you. I mean, that's what they did teach. They're changing it now. But never forget where you've come. Never forget what you've done. And you can still be yourself, and be yourself, and talk. And if you're married, talk to your spouse.
I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that.
Just tell her, I just want you to listen. That's all I want, is just for you to listen. And you may cry and you may show your emotion, but you got to do it. You have to do it.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Mike, because it's one thing that I didn't do. I had a female partner of mine get assaulted, and I was when I went to go arrest the guy, and he tried to escape, and he punched in the side of the face, and I caught the guy. But I remember coming home, and I was riding my bicycle to work at that time, and I was late, and my wife rang me, and I could feel my phone vibrating as I was coming down. I came around to the back steps, and I sat down, and I'm gonna tear up here. I already know I am. And I sat down, and she goes, "What's wrong?" Because I was like 4 hours overtime.
And
I was supposed to finish at 2 a.m. I was home at sunrise. Um, and
yeah,
she goes, "What's wrong? What happened?" And I was like, and I just exploded. And that was when, because that was about a year and a half into the job, and I hadn't been telling her about the stuff. I've been telling her about the exciting things, but
yeah,
not about the rough things and all that. And it all came flooding out. And then guess what I did after that? I shut down again.
yep,
And it's so important. Your spouse knows you. She or he knows when things aren't right. You don't have to go into the gory details about all of it, but just talking it out makes a huge difference. And as we talked about with a little bit of emotion side of stuff, is we have to have emotions as law enforcement. Now, I love this. I love and sad that you had to experience it, but the guy, torturing himself right in front of you. In that moment, yes, you have to kind of put some of your emotions away. You can let some some tears come out in that, but you do have a job to do.
yep.
It's as you said, the afterwards, the debrief, the being around people. Maybe it's not even your colleagues, but going home and telling your spouse, "This is what I saw today. This is where I was." Now she or he won't understand completely because they weren't there, they don't live it, but they can understand that you're going through stuff, that if you start to become snappy, if you start to shut down, if you start to get into the bottle, if you whatever your crux is, you start to disconnect, they can then go, "Well, Mike, what's going on? Are you okay with that thing that you went to the other day?"
But if they got to listen. But you're right.
Yeah.
That's what has to happen.
But again, I think, like, for myself, my wife knew me before I was in the police, and she always says she reckons it was a lot easier because she knew who I was before I was a cop. If you're dating somebody that is a cop already, it's a little bit. She reckons it's a lot more difficult, which I could agree with. But it's that understanding, and any spouses that are listening to this, understand that a cop sees things. I saw an article a little while back, sees like 18 times as much trauma in 1 year than a normal person does.
In their lifetime. And
Yeah.
they see it.
Then they do, yes, than they do in their lifetime. That was it.
Lifetime, yeah.
18 times more in 1 year as a cop
Yep.
in the U.S. than they do than somebody will in their lifetime. Now think, you did how many years in law enforcement?
30.
30 times 18. There you go. So, and it's okay, but we've got to remember the learnings from all this. We get to now teach the next people coming in what we wish that we had known.
I encourage them to talk. I can tell you, my son, I know we've talked about some of his stories, but I've encouraged him. You need to talk to me. You need to talk to me, but you need to talk to his wife. And I've sat with his wife, and she's a lawyer, so how sometimes that can be a little tough. But I've said you need to just listen. Don't ask questions. Listen. Because he needs to listen.
And we struggle, especially as men or any kind of masculine type thing, because our thing is to fix everything. And law enforcement is a very masculine role. So
Yep.
even females that are in law enforcement become quite masculine. They lose a lot of their femininity, which I've found, which is good and bad, but I think it's more destructive than anything. But what I've found, and this is just a tip for people, and you can pass this on to your son in that as well. What I've found is, and I learned this from one of my coaches, is the hat metaphor. So I always ask my wife when she starts to come to me with a problem or something that that's going on for her, I always ask her, I go, "Do you want husband Chris or do you want coach Chris?"
Yep.
Because they're two totally different people. Husband Chris is going to be there, he's going to understand, he's going to emotionally support you, He's not going to feed into everything, but he's going to emotionally be there, and he's not going to try and fix it.
Yeah.
Or do you want Coach Chris, who's going to give you all the solutions and will help work you through it?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
sometimes she'll go, oh, and she'll hesitate for a second, and then she'll go, I want Coach Chris. I was like, okay, cool. Coach Chris it is. But it's, do you want husband Mike or do you want cop Mike?
Yep.
Do you want husband Mike or do you want solution Mike?
But you got to remember, I didn't learn that.
And you don't, yeah, but I'm saying this
Yeah.
for anybody who's listening, because it's a huge thing that can help a lot of people, because what it does is it puts boundaries in place. And so when you come home from one of those jobs, you can be like, you can come home, and again, that comes down to that communication side of things. Is you come home and you go, sweetie or husband or whatever, whoever the partner is, I need husband or wife person because I've had one of those days.
Yeah.
And that way they can just be there, zip it, and just listen. And then if they want to have asking you questions in that, then cool. But it's just being there. Most of the time I feel like if I'd come home and just told my wife what was going on and she just gave me a big hug, fuck, it would have made life so much better. It's
I never did that. I wouldn't do it. I would shut down. I wouldn't. Um, oh, how was your night? Oh, how was the call out? It was fine. End of story.
Yeah.
And I would just. It's like, don't you want to talk about anything? No, there's nothing to talk about. I don't know about that plant over in that yard. I think, that we got to replant that. Okay, well, yeah, okay, well, that's good.
Well, you also lose, what ends up happening is you end up losing your almost in a way, you lose your masculinity, because a masculine person, or a masculine person, I'm talking about, masculine people here at the moment, they're very direct and can make decisions. And so when we're cops and we're in that masculine state,
Yeah.
we can make the biggest and the hardest decisions, can't we?
You have no idea, but we can't do it that other way.
We can't live the other way. We don't go home if it's the other way. And so then when we come home, we lose that because of everything else. So it's very important for any listeners in that to recognize that everything we've talked about today is excellent. And the reason I say that is because without us going through this, the next ones coming up behind us cannot learn from it.
Right.
So there's been a lot of learnings here that Mike's talked about, the things like communication, talking, being open about stuff.
Learn let one of the things I see with the new cops today is they forget where the old cops have come. But the old cops have come from, we did things differently than what they do today. There is no doubt about it.
Very.
And I'm not saying their job's hard. They have different issues that they have technology now that they have to deal with. We didn't have that technology back in the day. And so we handle things differently than what they do, how they have to handle it today. But you have to talk and don't shut down and don't isolate and be yourself and find something that keeps you going, whatever that may be, whatever that is. But talk and I'm always here. I'll talk to anybody. If anybody in your shows or anybody, they can absolutely reach out to me. I still have people reach out to me from back in Oregon just to check in, say, hey, I had a rough time. You got a minute? I'll listen to you. I will sit down and I will talk with you.
How does somebody get in touch with you, Mike? How are you happy for someone to get in touch with you?
Phone number, email. Do you want me to give it out, or do you put it out?
Yeah, I'll put it into the things if you're happy for your phone number and your email to be shared out there with the world.
Yes.
I can put it in there. But for those that are just listening right now, what's the best email to get a hold of you? So that, if they're just listening in their car right now and they're not reading the description.
It's Mike, MikeMNDER @Yahoo.
There you go. We'll put that in the description as well. Mike, now I know, I'm a huge identity guy, or why guy as I call it. and I know we've talked about this before, and it's something that we might be working together to help, kind of help you and even your son kind of work through. But I know you identified as a cop for a very long time. Who would you say that you identify as in a whole throughout your whole life?
What do you mean type? I'm
So
not sure
like,
I
so
know what you're.
or what would you say your why is? That driving why that causes you to, that has helped you through everything, that is, made you who you are, that is that driving why behind everything. I think probably the easier thing.
I think, I always look back even why I did all this stuff is I always wanted to help people,
Mhm.
and to this day I still do. Even when I do what I work with now, I try to help people, try to get them on the right track, and you know, try to, try to do something. So my why is always, why am I always helping people and trying to be that person?
Mm.
I know when I retire here next week, I'm not going to have any of that. And that makes me nervous, to be right up front with you. I mean, I'm scared about that a lot. I have a lot of fears right now, because I don't have any. I'm not going to be able to reach out and help people, and
Mm.
so I don't know what's going to happen here. To be honest with you.
Swear, man. I know there's as many people, if they've listened to most of my episodes, the helping people. I believe everything goes deeper than that. And obviously,
Yeah.
you're at the stage where that's where it's at, and we're gonna work through that. But just to go a little bit deeper, why is it important for you to help people?
I just don't want anybody to walk in my shoes. If
Mm.
I can get them out of my shoes and try to put them in the right path, then that's what I really want to do.
Did you have good
Because
shoes when you were a kid?
what do you mean? Like a what? Like I said, I grew up in a very Mayberry type home, if
Mm.
that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So I didn't even know. I remember when I was in the Reserve Academy my first time, and we had a section on domestic violence. And I remember going, "What's domestic violence?" I had no idea. I
Mm.
never knew what that was, you know? So, I mean, it was like, people do that stuff. People fight like that, you know? I remember that. I remember being on those calls and I'm like going, people really fight like this?
Yeah.
Beat the shit out of each other and do all these things. I'm like, wow, I didn't even know that even happened before.
Interesting. It'd be interesting to dig deeper into that, and we'll do that at another time. But I do believe, obviously, that it goes deeper. But and just real quick, once you do dig deeper into things, and this is for everybody else, not necessarily just for you, Mike, but once you dig deeper into it and you actually apply it to yourself, like, I talk about mission statements and that a lot now. I do a lot of training with people around it. As you then start to apply it to yourself, so you find ways to serve it. So mine is to create less pain for myself and others, so we create the best version of ourselves. It's my mission statement. It's what I live by, whether it be career, whether it be relationships, whether it be enjoyment, whether it be fitness, financial, all of it. I apply it against that. And I just did an episode with somebody with a different guys, actually me being interviewed just before we recorded this episode, and it's all about talking about that, because
Right.
then you actually know who you can stand on your own 2 feet. And I know we're talking further about this off this episode, but for those that are listening, it's so important to recognize that you are you. You're not what you do.
Yep.
You're
Very,
not how
very
you
true.
serve. You are you.
Be you.
Be you. And we
Be
talked about
you.
this before. You said this as a cop. Be you. Don't lose you.
Right.
Do everything in your power to not lose you. And so this is where a mission statement can help with that. Or knowing that why at a deep level, or even at a somewhat surface level. Uh, Mike, I'm gonna ask just a couple more questions, and we'll wrap up. But what would be your number one piece of advice? And I think you've already kind of said it, but we'll see what you say now. What would be your number one piece of advice for listeners when it comes to being, I want to say being a first responder, but being a helper, being somebody who helps people? What would be your number one piece of advice?
Try not to get emotionally involved, I guess. Try not. I think I think it just goes back is when I look back, I wish I would have shown my feelings a lot more and did a lot more and not hide everything,
Mm.
you know? So I think, I sit here and listen to all this stuff that we're talking about. And I just think back, and advice would be just don't get where I was at,
Mm.
don't find something, reach out, go way before anything else, just reach out. And I mean, I told you this, I've told you this, and it still bothers me to this day, but I want to be able to feel again.
Mm.
I want that. I want to be able to feel. I want to have emotions, and I want to be able um, just to feel again, where I feel like I can I can experience that again. It's just a big hurdle for me right now. So, and because I'm afraid to show it to anybody, I'm afraid. It's like you can't, you know.
Well, you know, it's a habit now. It's a habit for you. And
Yeah,
the first, I want to say this though, and I want to reiterate this to viewers and listeners, and also to yourself, Mike. But really bring this to attention. You just started.
yeah,
We actually started a few weeks ago when we first talked, but
yeah,
you've put it out there even more now.
yeah,
That's what you want. That's the vision that you want. And once we have a vision, even if we don't do anything with it, we don't set any plan in place, it will still slowly get chipped away at if we keep focusing on that vision, because we'll start looking
yeah,
for ways to do it. We'll start talking to people. As you said, it's talk to people. Don't get to where you are. You want to be able to feel emotions again. So whoever's listening to this or watching this, what's your vision? What's that one thing that you feel like is missing, and put it out there to the universe. So I'm glad that you brought that up, Mike.
yeah.
Um, the very last question I like to ask before I open it up to the final words and letting you, take the stand for a second. What would be your top tip to self-happiness, Mike?
I don't know.
Mm.
I uh, you know, yeah, dang, Chris, man, that's hard. It's being, it's just finding yourself. I think I just when I find myself, and I'm working harder and harder every day to find that. I always feel better when I think I found it. If that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
So still, it's getting there. So find yourself and don't lose yourself.
Yeah.
I really lost myself, like really, really lost myself. So that's why, it's 30 years of being a cop, and then the last 10 years I've been doing defense work, and I've lost myself. Everything's been about everybody else, nothing about me.
Mm.
So um, find yourself and stick with it and do something good.
Love it.
And
Love it.
don't bury yourself in the job. It's not worth it. It's not even a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
The job is an amazing job. I always say this: it's the best job in the world, but the hardest job in the world. So just
it
remember.
was it was a good job. It was a great life, and there was a lot of not just negative. There was some really good, rewarding things.
You do
You
a
know,
lot of good. You do a lot of,
but
and you did a lot of good, Mike.
yeah, I think I still, there's a lot of people out there who still keep in touch with me. I don't know if I told you this, but a young lady back in 1999, when I was a SRO in a high school, um, reached out to me because of all this police stuff going on out there in this community. And I remember her, and she sent me an email just in the last couple months, and just says, I remember you, and I want you to know how you changed my life and my thinking of how police work is. And she says, I want to thank you because I see what everybody's going through now, and how it's so, misinformed. And she wrote this lengthy thing, and I just like, wow. I mean, that's 1999. That was a long time ago.
That's an impact. That's an impact.
Yeah, for somebody to remember that, and to reach out and say something.
Yeah.
So
It's a massive impact for somebody to reach out 23 years later.
Yeah, God, crazy.
That's an impact that you're still on her mind about that. So, Mike, thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for being so open and vulnerable and talking about your stories and what's going on. I know there's so much more depth in there that we could be here for hours talking about all this. But I do hope that somebody, I don't hope, I know that somebody will take this and it will make a difference and will make an impact. So you said that, in 8 days or so, you're worried about not being able to help people. Well, you've just now continually helping people because this episode's out there for the rest of eternity. So, it's there. So you're going to be helping people all the time, and people constantly do listen to older episodes as well. So there's that. But what I like to do is I like to give you an opportunity to, put your final words and put anything that's kind of on your mind before we wrap up.
Kudos to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just thank you. So what you're doing is great. It's great. So
awesome.
We're going to get it done somehow.
We are. We're going to get it done, Mike. We're going to get it done. We're changing the culture. We're changing the way people look at themselves.
Yep.
That's the key thing. Well, Mike, thank you very much. Thanks for being here. Thanks for, as I said, thanks for being so vulnerable. This is Fight the Burnout. When we burn out, we become destructive. Not necessarily always to others, but we do for ourselves. And just burnout, as we know, looks differently for different people. And so I want you to really remember, take one thing away from this, maybe two, maybe three, maybe five, maybe a dozen. But only really you need to just look for one thing. Whatever's resonating for you right now, take it away. And remember, we're always here to help. You can reach out to Mike. His details will be in the description down below. Or you can reach out to us at team@createfromwhy.com. Or you can come to our Facebook group. We've got a free law enforcement career development Facebook group where we talk about this kinds of stuff. We're actually having, we have different people in there to give trainings. I give all my mindset training stuff away. We've got a 5-day challenge in there, all sorts of different stuff. It's just, it's facebook.com/groups/police-fam. So police FAM. And come join in and have a look around. Get active in there, talk in there, because the more you put out there, the more you're going to get back. But we'd love to see you in there, and also see you contact us and let us know what's going on. But again, thank you very much for listening, and we will see you guys on the next episode. Remember, these go live on Fridays, New Zealand time, or Thursdays in the U.S., and we're here to help not just law enforcement and first responders, but everybody. But we also know that law enforcement and first responders have one of the hardest and most stressful jobs out there, because we see 18 times as much trauma in 1 year as somebody in their lifetime. That number still just amazes me. But anyways, it is true. I saw trauma on my first day of the job, so there you go. Anyways, we will talk to you guys soon again. Thank you very much for watching and listening.